All right, we are back. This is going to be a video about the Creemore Vertical Challenge, which is a run that happens in Ontario, Canada. And this video, I'm going to break it into two segments. I'm going to give like a kind of course overview to kind of talk about what you should expect. And then the back half, I'm going to talk about my own experience. Prior to this race, I noticed there was very few videos on this race, so it was tough to kind of get a sense of what you were going to find. So I'll try to fill that gap there. And then we'll go into kind of story time. I'll talk about my experience, but yeah, let's jump into it. So the Creemore Vertical Challenge happens in the town of Creemore, which is northwest of Toronto. At least happens nowadays in October, mid-October, but from what I understand, there were times when it would happen in the summer, so maybe they bumped it due to the busy summer race schedule. Hard to say. The race itself comes in three distances: 27.5 kilometers, 55 kilometers, and 80K. I did the 80K or 50 miler this year. In general, the loop is 850 meters of elevation per loop, so there's just quite a bit of climbing in here. General path is you start in the town itself, you would run out, you would go kind of through somebody's backyard. They kind of had it set up there, and then you would go through like a small trail section. You'd be back onto kind of the road, coming all the way down. You kind of do a loop through, you hit some more trails, you're back on the road. There's a lot of road on this one, and then you'd kind of loop back right around again, and then eventually you come right back into town the same way you went out. And yeah, obviously depending on how many loops, you would go through that same path. Terrain type, as mentioned on their website, mainly gravel road 70%, trail for the remaining 30%. Gravel can be an interesting verbiage, because it's like, is it loose gravel, is it tight? So I got a few pictures, so let me pop those over, and you can get a sense of what to expect. So this type of road here was a large portion. It was kind of tightly packed, maybe like a little bit of rubble on the side of the road. It was like this a lot. Sometimes you would have like small kind of climbs. This is one of the climbs kind of heading into a trail after a little bit. But you can still see it's pretty tight on there. Here's another one. So yeah, you're spending a lot of time on roads like this. What kind of shoes you choose to wear, you should consider this kind of as like the main type of land. The trails themselves were somewhat hilly overall. This is a few pictures there. This section here was probably the longest climb, and it got a little bit muddier towards the top there, but you know, some stones, uneven ground, grass, but nothing too crazy, especially if you're familiar with Ontario trails. But yeah, that's kind of like a general sense of what the trails looked like this year. Boom, boom. What else do I want to say about it? Yeah, so in terms of other parts of the course overview, there were multiple aid stations throughout, and they were kind of structured in a way where you would hit the same aid station twice. If I recall, there was one aid station right here. There was one kind of at this loop point, so you would kind of pass through, hit it once, finish this kind of loop through. You would hit it back as you're coming back up the road, and they kind of, obviously it's less stations to set up if they have redundancy like that, but you never went that far without a aid station overall, which was kind of nice. But yeah, so now we're going to jump to. Okay, we are back. Let's try this one more time. Okay, so we're just going to watch this kind of video. It's a Google Maps kind of walking through the course at 2x speed, and I'm just going to kind of walk through some of my race experiences. This kind of loops through. But anyways, yeah, lap one starts in town, was rode for a bit, and you can kind of see as we're walking through here on the gravel roads, we're going to see a section where we actually get pulled off in somebody's driveway right now. We come back. Everyone kind of went off course because it wasn't marked. That's probably the only spot where it wasn't marked too well. Otherwise, back into the trails. I didn't do a lot of prep for this one in terms of learning the map because it was hard to get information, but essentially it was kind of jogging the first few climbs. They mentioned the trails might be somewhat muddy, so I wasn't sure if I had the wrong shoes on. I opened up with the Solomon Genesis. The first trail sections were a bit tricky, but nothing too crazy, especially when it was a bit darker. But after that, the first aid station, things were pretty good. There were quite a few kind of nice downhill sections that got pretty aggressive, and you could get like quite a bit of speed on, which was cool. Kind of made up for the climbs overall. You would like kind of climb on the trails and you'd be going downhill on the road, so really kind of an imbalance. There definitely were points where I questioned if I should have been wearing a road running shoe versus a trail shoe, because this thing was so much gravel. I was wondering, hey, should I have like a tempo shoe on or something with like a little bit more stability for the road? Maybe I would have handled it a little bit better. Anyways, lap two, I decided to bring out the poles for a bit more stability on the climbs, and this lap was kind of by far the worst. The sun kind of came out hard in the afternoon, temperature got up to 22 degrees, and many of the running sections were fully exposed. I remember walking like a few of the climbs and just cooking away trying to hammer back electrolyte. And I hit that point kind of in the middle of the second lap where I was questioning if I should drop down to the 55K and like be over with this day. You always kind of run into those points in the ultra where your mind starts questioning everything. You're like, I'm not going to make it. Things are hurting too much, feeling uncomfortable. And I was getting like this point, especially near the midpoint of that second lap, where my ankle was starting to feel somewhat irritated. Felt like the kind of heel counter, I guess, for the Genesis was rubbing weird against one of my ankles. It really started to hurt. Excuse me. And my thought was to kind of swap the shoe at the third lap. I would refresh my gear and nutrition at the start line for each lap, taking a few minutes to adjust gear, grab more electrolytes that I kind of had cut in the pre-packaged baggies, had some knack waffles and bars. For the third lap, I would switch into the Speedcross 6. Unfortunately, my ankle still felt irritated even after the shoe swap, so you kind of had to like suck it up from there. And the start of the third lap was a bit slow until after the first trail section. I was still kind of thinking way too much about how my ankle felt, and it's always weird. Like if you have some pain, if you could not think about it or think about something else, you can get through. But if all you're doing is concentrating on it, it can be rough goings. Anyways, got out of the trail, kind of got onto the gravel again, and I was able to kind of start getting into a jog. The day was starting to kind of cool down, which was nice, and kind of got a second wind and started to kind of make up some ground. And kind of getting back on the road. And getting into a good pace, I eventually would like catch up, and I had no idea kind of where I was placed in terms of the pack, because people are behind you, in front of you. There's multiple distances being run at any point. Yeah, at the start of the race, you're kind of close with people, but after that, you really have no sense of where you're at. Especially in a smaller event, it's not like you have like a GPS ranking or anything, or even if it really matters too much. But when you start to like see somebody, it can like create a cool dynamic. At least that is my experience. So during kind of the third lap, I would catch up, and I would catch up to this kid kind of midway, maybe not quite midway of that third lap. And it was probably 200-meter gap between us. And he definitely heard like my pole hit the gravel, and I could see him kind of turn his head. He knew I was there, and we were on like a one of the kind of last muddy climbs of the lap. And I would say my climbing's probably one of my stronger assets, at least the technical climbs. I'm able to climb at a pretty decent pace, relative, at least that's my experience. And I started climbing pretty fast, started to kind of cut that gap between us. But as we kind of got near the top of the hill, I think he got a second wind and decided to just kind of gun it, and he flew up. And then we're kind of like back out onto the roads, and probably by the time I hit the top of the hill, there's a 200-meter gap is back in place there. I'm jogging, he's jogging. He'd get these kind of moments where he would speed up his jog, and it would only last maybe like 50 meters, then he would kind of slow back down. But we were both consistently jogging. There was like no walking going on. And then we hit this point where there's like a downhill, and it's one of those kind of steeper downhill points, and he just guns it down there. And wow, he pulled out like this one was steep to the point where it kind of hurt if you ran it hard. And I still ran the downhill at a pretty decent point. After the downhill, you hit the trail section, and I guess on like this map here, we can visualize it because you're kind of running around, and there's some point kind of when you come through this trail section, and then it's like kind of like downhill. And after the trail section, I did see him in the trail, and even when I got out and was kind of heading back to this juncture point for the aid station, he was nowhere in sight. And I would actually end up running this whole entire flat section all the way back, and still did not see him the entire time, which is cool. So I kind of assumed like he was gone, he was moving at like a completely different pace, which is cool. But doom, kind of hit the aid station before the last big climb of the race. Grabbed some more electrolyte, water, geared up, and started on that last big climb. And guess who I saw? Kind of 200 meters back, or ahead, I should say, at this point. The kid's there, and actually, right on the video here, this is like the climb that's heading up, and it's just straight up this road, and it was pretty steep climb overall. I don't have the exact grading in front of me, but yeah, I could see him. He was walking this hill. He looked toasted a little bit, but this was a rough hill too, so it wasn't like I was going to be jogging up it, but I started speed walking it with a little bit more purpose. At this point, it's kind of like 8K, 10K left, give or take, in that ballpark before this race is done. We're on the third lap. So I started pushing on this hill in a power walk, and by the time we kind of reached the top of the hill, I was able to kind of close about 20 meters behind him. And when I was pretty close to him, we're both still kind of moving and just starting like maybe a light jog. At that point, I'm taking back more water and electrolyte, taking back another knack waffle, just starting to feel really good. And then I kind of made the choice, hey, let's go. I hit a switch and just kind of increased my pace by probably 30 seconds a kilometer faster, and just gunned it past him. And it's kind of like at least a mental rule for me. It's like you cannot look back. If you're gonna pass somebody, especially late, you gotta just keep going. And I didn't want to be in like a sprint finish with this kid for the entire time, but you never know what's going to happen. But anyways, I started jogging pretty quick. I passed him. I started into the downhill sections, and I just never let the gas off and didn't turn my head. And the last 6K was such a blur. I was on huge momentum, hitting the final aid station, I felt like a NASCAR driver in and out of there, probably like 20 seconds. As I'm like coming up to the aid station, you're like cracking your flask, dumping out the other piece, getting everything ready. It was in and out. I'd actually caught up to one girl doing the 55K who was on her final lap, but she was limping pretty bad at that point. She actually let me kind of cut her on the aid station, which was super nice and respectful. Um, she asked if I could lend her a leg, which is I always love the jokes that you get during these races, especially near the end, because you can tell like everyone's hurting on some degree. But anyways, in and out, 20 seconds or less, start going. I know that I'm getting close to the ending sections, so just trying to keep the pace up, don't fall off. And one of the things like you'll notice is like it's 85K. I did not run the optimal line for this race. I was all over the place, and I actually hit the 80K point right around 10 hours, I believe, if I recall. I'd have to see if it was like moving time or if it was overall time. It was probably just moving time. But I kind of had the sub 10, which was pretty sweet kind of mental note. But between maybe the GPS being off, running curvy lines, there was a little mishap at the start. I knew I was going to be coming well above the kind of 80K mark. But anyways, running every section, and eventually I would get to this point where you kind of got back to town after doing the last little bit of a trail section. You're running downhill, and there's like this iron bridge, then there's a little bit more road, and you're kind of like 1,500 meters in the town. So I'm heading down the final section, and I see one more runner, and he's in rough shape for sure, probably doing 7-minute 30 minute kilometer pace, I would guess. Not moving well, but he knew he was almost there, and I thought to myself, it's like one more person, can we do it? And I just, we're gonna like give it all at this last section, and just kind of picked up the poles and just went into the closest thing. I wouldn't want to call it a sprint. It was probably more of like a tempo pace, which is kind of a sprint at the end of a 50 mile, or at least for me. And he saw me coming too, and it was kind of like the head nod there, and I didn't even want to give it any chance. So I hit you hit that iron bridge, you pass it through, and you're pushing to the last section, and you're just booking it up these sidewalks, running through, and then hit that finish line, and it felt so good. Overall, it turns out I finished 6th place overall, 3rd in my age group. I set a PR for myself by almost 3 hours. I cut off my previous time when doing a 50-mile race, which was awesome. Couldn't have asked for more. And I think this is getting probably close to the end, probably a few minutes out, but anyways, so I guess some closing thoughts. Ultras are always brutal, so kind of staying in the game the whole day is, the big point. The general rule of thumb of starting out slow is wise, and I felt like I did that for the most part this time out. Maybe could have been a bit slower. I feel like I just need more races under the belt to kind of get a sense of where it was. But this was the first time I got to the end and was able to run to the end, at least at this distance, which was pretty sweet. The N95 team, which did the organization for the event, I've done a few of the N95 races. Very friendly team, very competent. They kind of know the ultra game, at least in Ontario from what I've seen. Volunteers were awesome. Aid stations themselves, I guess I could put a few notes on. Probably pretty standard affair. Chips, pretzels, candy, Coke, water, electrolyte. occasional aid stations maybe had like a few extras that maybe the individuals brought or something, but your typical affair. Nothing crazy, but I think what was expected. Lots of water though, which is always the most important factor. But anyways, yeah, the Creemore Vertical Challenge, kind of a hybrid. I wouldn't call it like a straight up trail race, but I guess trail is considered any time the surface is different from just road. Maybe if you consider doing this race, look at what the weather is, maybe try a road shoe. Or if you have some kind of gravel hybrid. I know I've seen a few kind of gravel focused shoes starting to hit the market. Could probably help. In terms of using poles, a bit mixed. I think they were still worth it to take a little bit of the edge off the legs, because the climbing was somewhere in the middle in terms of toughness. The climbs themselves weren't that technical, but there was quite a few of them, so having the poles was kind of nice and being able to kind of pull them out. Yeah, and I guess in terms of the shoe game, the Speed Cross 6 probably were kind of overkill, and yeah, that's my Creemore Vertical Challenge experience and course overview. Hopefully that was helpful, and good luck if you decide to take this one on, and I will catch you guys later.